The transport ship Wanderer's Hope groaned as it dropped out of hyperspace, its hull scarred from 3 months of dodging pirate vessels and asteroid fields. Captain Reeves gripped the command chair as the ship shuddered to a halt above the uncharted world designated only as Kepler 442c. The planet spun below them like a green and blue marble, its surface unmarked by the sprawling cities or orbital rings that marked civilized space. "Emergency landing protocols are our only option," announced Chief Engineer Martinez, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "The hyperdrive core is completely fried, and life support is failing on decks 4 through 7. We've got maybe 6 hours of breathable air left." 16-year-old Zara Chen pressed her face against the observation deck viewport, watching the alien world grow larger as their crippled ship descended through layers of pearl-white clouds. Unlike the other passengers who wept or prayed to various deities, Zara felt only curiosity burning in her chest. She had spent her entire life aboard generation ships and space stations, never setting foot on an actual planet. The idea of breathing unfiltered air and feeling real gravity thrilled her more than it should have given their desperate circumstances. The landing was brutal. The ship carved a smoking furrow through a forest of towering crystalline trees before finally grinding to a halt in a clearing, beside a lake that sparkled like liquid starlight. Emergency klaxons wailed as evacuation pods launched survivors toward the planet's surface. Zara found herself separated from the main group when her pod's guidance system malfunctioned, sending her careening into a dense grove several kilometers from the crash site. She emerged from the twisted wreckage of her pod with nothing but the clothes on her back, a basic survival kit, and an overwhelming sense of wonder. The air tasted sweet and clean, filled with the songs of alien birds and the whisper of wind through leaves that chimed like tiny bells. The gravity was lighter than Earth standard, making each step feel like a small bounce. For the first time in her life, Zara stood under an open sky, but wonder quickly gave way to practical concerns. The emergency beacon in her survival kit was damaged, and she had no way to contact the other survivors. Night was falling on this strange world, and she could hear sounds in the forest that definitely weren't birds. Large sounds. Hungry sounds. Following the gentle downward slope of the land, Zara made her way toward what looked like a valley in the distance. The crystalline trees grew thicker here, their faceted trunks refracting the dying light into rainbow patterns that danced across the forest floor. It would have been beautiful if not for the growing chorus of howls echoing from the darkness behind her. She was running now, crashing through undergrowth that sparkled and sang at her passage. Her lungs burned in the thin air, and her legs ached from the unfamiliar sensation of running on solid ground instead of metal deck plates. The howls were getting closer, and she could hear the thunder of heavy paws on the forest floor. The valley opened before her like a vast amphitheater, its walls lined with caves that glowed with bioluminescent fungi. At the center lay a circular lake so perfectly still it looked like a mirror, reflecting the alien constellations above. And beside that lake, coiled in obvious pain, lay something that made Zara's breath catch in her throat. The dragon was easily 40 meters long, its scales shifting between deep emerald and midnight blue in the starlight. Its great head was pressed against the ground, and it was making a sound like distant thunder mixed with the cry of a wounded whale. One massive eye, golden and intelligent, fixed on Zara as she emerged from the tree line. Every instinct screamed at her to run. Dragons were the stuff of legend and nightmare, creatures from humanity's oldest stories about impossible things. But this was real, and it was clearly suffering. The howls of her pursuers echoed from the forest behind her, growing closer by the second. The dragon's eye tracked her movement as she slowly approached, her hands raised to show she meant no harm. Up close, she could see the problem. A massive thorn, easily as long as her arm and covered in barbs, was embedded deep in the creature's nostril. Dark blood trickled from the wound, and the dragon's breathing was labored and painful. "Easy there, big fellow," Zara whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of approaching predators. "I know it hurts. Let me help." The dragon's eye narrowed, and for a moment Zara thought it might incinerate her where she stood. Instead, it lowered its great head until its nostril was level with her chest, close enough that she could feel the heat of its breath on her face. The thorn was buried deep, but Zara had steady hands and years of experience helping her father repair delicate ship components. She gripped the base of the thorn firmly and began to work it loose, whispering soothing words as the dragon rumbled in pain. Blood flowed freely now, staining her clothes and the ground beneath her feet. Behind them, the howling stopped, Zara glanced over her shoulder to see a pack of wolf-like creatures emerging from the forest, their eyes reflecting the starlight like mirrors. They were each the size of a small ground car, with crystalline spines running down their backs and jaws that opened too wide to be natural. The dragon's eye followed her gaze, and its rumble deepened to something that made the ground vibrate beneath her feet. But it held perfectly still as she continued working on the thorn, trusting this small human creature with its pain. With a wet, sucking sound, the thorn finally came free. The dragon's relief was immediate and obvious, its breathing becoming deep and steady once more. It lifted its great head and looked down at Zara with something that might have been gratitude. The pack of predators had crept closer while she worked, forming a semicircle around the lake. Their leader, a massive beast with scars crisscrossing its crystalline hide, let out a howl that was answered by dozens of others hidden in the forest shadows. Zara looked up at the dragon, then back at the approaching pack. "I don't suppose you're feeling grateful enough to give a girl a lift." The dragon's response was immediate and devastating. It reared back on its hind legs, wings spreading wide enough to blot out the stars, and released a roar that shattered the crystalline trees at the forest's edge. The sound rolled across the valley like thunder, and the pack of predators froze in terror. But the dragon wasn't finished. From deep in its throat came a stream of liquid fire that turned night into day, sweeping across the lake's surface in a wall of superheated plasma. The lead predator tried to dodge, but the flames caught it mid-leap, reducing the creature to ash before its feet touched the ground. The rest of the pack scattered, their crystalline spines rattling like wind chimes as they fled back into the forest depths. Their howls faded into the distance, replaced by the gentle lapping of water against the lakeshore and the soft settling sounds of cooling stone. Zara stood frozen in amazement, her face flushed from the heat of dragon fire and her ears ringing from the creature's roar. The dragon lowered its head until it was level with hers once again, and she found herself staring into that massive golden eye. "Thank you," she whispered, and could have sworn she saw understanding flicker in those ancient depths. The dragon's response surprised her completely. Instead of flying away or returning to its lair, it lowered itself to the ground and extended one wing toward her, creating a natural ramp. The meaning was clear, and after only a moment's hesitation, Zara climbed up onto the creature's broad back. The scales beneath her were warm and smooth, each one larger than her hand and harder than steel. She settled herself just behind the dragon's neck, gripping the ridge of bone and cartilage that ran down its spine. The dragon turned its head to look at her, and she could have sworn it was smiling. "I'm Zara," she said, feeling slightly ridiculous for introducing herself to a dragon. "I don't suppose you have a name?" The dragon's rumble might have been laughter. It lowered its head and touched its snout gently to her arm, careful not to scratch her with its fangs. The gesture felt oddly formal, like a handshake or a bow. Then they were airborne, and Zara's breath caught in her throat as the ground fell away beneath them. She had spent her entire life in the artificial gravity of ships and stations. But this was different. This was real flight, powered by muscle and bone and the ancient magic that let something so massive defy gravity through sheer force of will. The dragon's wings beat with a rhythm like thunder, each stroke carrying them higher above the crystalline forest. From this height, Zara could see the scar their ship had carved through the landscape, marked by the flickering lights of emergency beacons and the glow of small fires. The other survivors had established a camp near the wreckage, and she could see tiny figures moving among the debris. But the dragon wasn't flying toward the crash site. Instead, it banked toward a range of mountains that glowed with internal light, their peaks wreathed in clouds that sparkled like diamonds. Zara wanted to protest, to tell the creature she needed to rejoin the other humans, but something in its manner suggested this was important. They flew through the night, passing over landscapes that defied description. Forests of glass trees that rang like bells in the wind, plains covered in flowers that glowed like stars, rivers that flowed uphill, defying gravity as they spiraled around floating islands of stone. As dawn approached, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, the dragon began its descent toward a mountain that rose like a spear point from the surrounding peaks. Its sides were honeycombed with caves, and Zara could see other dragons perched on ledges or soaring between the mountain's many levels. This was a dragon city, she realized. An entire civilization built into the living rock, with architecture that flowed like music made solid. Bridges of crystallized air connected distant peaks, and waterfalls flowed in impossible spirals through spaces that shouldn't have been able to contain them. The dragon landed on a broad platform carved from the mountain's living stone, and Zara slid down from its back on unsteady legs. Other dragons were gathering, creatures of every size and color, their scales reflecting the morning light like stained glass windows. They watched her with curious eyes, but none approached. Her dragon, however, wasn't finished with surprises. It lowered its head and began to speak. The words weren't in any language Zara recognized, but somehow she understood them anyway. The meaning flowed directly into her mind, bypassing her ears entirely. The dragon was introducing her to its people, telling the story of how she had freed it from pain when she could have run, how she had shown kindness to a creature that could have destroyed her without effort. But more than that, it was making a formal declaration. In the ancient tongue of dragons, it was claiming her as nest sister, family, one whose life was worth defending with its own. The gathered dragons rumbled their approval, a sound like distant earthquakes that made the mountain itself vibrate. Several of the elders stepped forward, their scales dulled with age but their eyes bright with intelligence. The eldest, an ancient female whose scales had turned the color of starlight, approached Zara with careful dignity. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of centuries. "Little flame friend," the translation whispered in Zara's mind, "you have done a great kindness to one of our children. We are in your debt, and the debt of dragons is not lightly given or easily forgotten." Zara found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I just helped because he was hurting. Anyone would have done the same." The elder dragon's laugh was like silver bells ringing in the wind. "No, little one. Your people would have run, or tried to capture and cage us, or sought to profit from our power. But you saw pain and moved to heal it even when death stalked at your heels. This is the mark of true nobility." Around them, the other dragons were dispersing to their daily activities, but several of the younger ones lingered to stare at this strange hairless creature their nest brother had adopted. Zara could feel their curiosity like a physical weight, mixed with something that might have been respect. "What happens now?" she asked, suddenly aware that she was very far from home and surrounded by creatures that could end her life with a careless thought. The elder dragon's eyes twinkled with something that might have been mischief. "Now, little flame friend, you learn what it means to be family to the children of sky and fire. Your nest brother has claimed you, and we do not abandon our own." She gestured with one wing toward the caves that dotted the mountain's face. "Choose a lair that pleases you and rest. When you wake, we will begin teaching you the ways of our people, and perhaps," her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, "you will teach us something of yours." As Zara was led away by her dragon companion, she couldn't help but smile. She had crash-landed on an alien world with nothing but the clothes on her back, and somehow she had found herself adopted by the most magnificent creatures in the galaxy. Her parents would never believe this story. 3 weeks had passed since Zara's arrival at the dragon city of Ethermount, and she was beginning to understand why humans had always told stories about these magnificent creatures. The dragons weren't just intelligent animals or mindless beasts of legend. They were an ancient civilization with art, philosophy, and technology that made human achievements look like children playing with blocks. Her nest brother, who had finally shared his name through the mind speech the dragons called thought singing, was called Paraxis the Starwing. He was considered young by dragon standards at only 300 years old, but his patience with Zara's questions and limitations seemed infinite. "Human memory is so brief," he observed one morning, as they sat on his favorite perch overlooking the valley below. "You forget the taste of yesterday's meal, but we remember the first flame our ancestors breathed 10,000 years ago." Zara had been learning to speak with thought singing, though her human mind could only manage the simplest concepts. The dragons communicated through layers of meaning that included emotion, memory, and abstract concepts her brain couldn't process. It was like trying to paint a symphony or sing a photograph. "But our memories are our own," she replied, settling back against his warm flank. "We don't share our ancestors' experiences, so we have to create new ones." This seemed to amuse Paraxis greatly. Dragon laughter was a wonderful thing, starting as a rumble in the chest and building to a sound like wind chimes made of silver. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the landing platforms below. Zara looked down to see dragons arriving in groups, their scales dark with exhaustion and their thought songs filled with urgency. She didn't need perfect translation to understand their distress. "What's happening?" she asked, but Paraxis was already spreading his wings. "Trouble," he replied grimly. "The Void Hunters have found our world." The flight to the council chamber was swift and terrifying. Zara clung to Paraxis's neck as he dove through the mountain's core, following passages that twisted through dimensions she couldn't perceive. The chamber itself was a vast sphere carved from a single crystal, its walls showing images of distant stars and planets. The assembled dragons filled every available space, their combined thought songs creating a symphony of concern and anger that made Zara's head ring. At the chamber's center floated the eldest dragons, their scales shimmering with power that bent light around them. Elder Crystallis, the ancient female who had welcomed Zara, spoke with voice that reached every corner of the vast space. "The harvesters approach our world with a fleet of void ships. They come to strip our mountains bare and cage our children for their gladiator pits." Images formed in the crystal walls, showing sleek black vessels that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Zara had heard stories of the Void Hunters during her time on human ships. They were slavers and planet killers, a nomadic race that consumed entire worlds to fuel their dark technology. "How many ships?" asked a dragon whose scales flickered between red and gold. 50, Crystallis replied, and the chamber erupted in dismayed thought songs. "Perhaps more. They will arrive within 3 days." Zara felt her stomach drop. 50 ships meant thousands of Void Hunters, armed with weapons that could crack planets and shields that could turn dragon fire into harmless light. She had seen the aftermath of their raids on the news feeds, entire star systems left as empty husks. "We must evacuate," suggested an elder dragon whose scales were the color of deep ocean. "Take the younglings to the hidden worlds beyond the galactic rim." "And abandon our sacred mountains?" The response came from dozens of dragons at once, their thought songs heavy with rejection. "These peaks have been our home since before your star was born." "We will not run. Then we fight," declared Paraxis, his thought song burning with fierce determination. Dragons do not bow to scavengers and slavers. The debate continued for hours, with young dragons calling for battle while the elders counseled caution. Zara listened to it all, her human mind working furiously on a problem that her dragon family seemed unable to solve. Finally, she stood up on Paraxis's back, drawing surprised attention from the assembled council. "May I speak?" The chamber fell silent. In 3 weeks, this was the first time Zara had addressed the full council, and her halting thought speech made some of the younger dragons rumble with amusement. "Honored elders," she began carefully, "I have lived among humans all my life. I know how they think, how they fight, and I know something about the Void Hunters that might help." Elder Crystallis gestured for her to continue, though Zara could sense skepticism in the ancient dragon's thought song. "The Void Hunters use fear as their greatest weapon," Zara explained, switching to spoken words because her thought speech wasn't sophisticated enough for complex ideas. "They attack worlds that seem weak or isolated, but they avoid enemies who might cost them too much to defeat." "You suggest we appear strong?" asked another elder. "Child, they have 50 ships and weapons that can shatter mountains." "No," Zara shook her head. "I suggest we appear crazy." The silence that followed was different now, filled with curiosity rather than skepticism. "Humans have a saying," Zara continued. "Never fight fair with a stranger. You don't know if they're armed, crazy, or both. The Void Hunters expect you to fight like dragons. Noble, direct, honorable. They've probably faced dragons before and know your tactics." She pointed toward the images of approaching ships. "But they've never faced dragons working with humans." "And humans," she grinned fiercely, "humans are very, very good at fighting dirty." Paraxis's thought song carried sudden understanding tinged with excitement. "What do you propose, Nest Sister?" "First, we need to contact my people at the crash site. They're engineers and technicians, not warriors. But they know things about technology that might surprise our enemies. Second, we need to think like humans instead of dragons." Elder Crystallis leaned forward, her ancient eyes bright with interest. "Explain." "Dragons are creatures of honor and flame," Zara said, her voice growing stronger as the plan took shape in her mind. "You fight in the open, announcing your presence with roars that shake mountains. You're magnificent and terrible and proud." She paused, looking around the chamber at hundreds of attentive dragon faces. "Humans are creatures of paranoia and spite. We lay traps and set ambushes. We fight from hiding and strike at weak points. We turn our enemies' strengths against them and make them afraid of shadows. Her grin turned savage. We're going to teach the Void Hunters that Earth's children learned their lessons well. The chamber erupted in excited thought songs as dragons began to understand the implications. They had been thinking of this as a glorious last battle, but Zara was proposing something entirely different. She was proposing a war. The rescue mission to retrieve the human survivors was unlike anything the dragons had ever attempted. Instead of the ceremonial flights they were accustomed to, Pyraxis and 5 other young dragons approached the crash site using human tactics, flying low through the crystalline forests and using the natural terrain to mask their approach. Zara directed them from Pyraxis's back, her heart pounding as they neared the makeshift camp her people had built around the wreckage of the Wanderer's Hope. She could see the defensive perimeter they had established, improvised weapons and sensor arrays cobbled together from ship components. "Remember," she whispered to Pyraxis through their growing mental link, "humans shoot first and ask questions later when they're scared. Let me do the talking." The dragons landed just outside the sensor perimeter, and Zara slid down from Pyraxis's back with her hands raised. The response was immediate and predictable. Emergency klaxons wailed as armed survivors took defensive positions behind whatever cover they could find. "Don't shoot," Zara called out, walking slowly toward the camp. "It's me, Zara Chen. Passenger manifest number 7743. Captain Reeves emerged from behind an overturned cargo container, his sidearm drawn but not aimed directly at her. His eyes were fixed on the 6 dragons behind her, creatures that could have incinerated his entire camp without breaking stride. "Zara?" His voice cracked with disbelief. "We thought you were dead. Your beacon went dark 3 weeks ago." "I've been learning some interesting things," she replied, gesturing toward her dragon companions. "And right now, I need to talk to Chief Engineer Martinez about weapons that don't exist and tactics that shouldn't work." The next 6 hours were a frantic blur of technical discussions and impossible engineering. Martinez listened to Zara's explanation of the approaching Void Hunter fleet with the grim expression of someone who had faced impossible odds before. 50 ships, she muttered, running calculations on her portable datapad. "Even if we could get the Wanderer's Hope flight worthy again, we'd last maybe 30 seconds in a straight fight." "Good thing we're not planning a straight fight," Zara replied. She spread a crude map of the planet across a makeshift table, marking locations with pieces of ship debris. "The dragons know this world better than anyone. They can hide entire armies in places the Void Hunters will never think to look." Dr. Yamoto, the ship's physicist, looked up from the dragon tech samples Zara had brought. "These crystalline formations aren't just decorative. They're some kind of exotic matter that resonates with specific energy frequencies. If we could weaponize that resonance—" "The dragons already have," Zara interrupted. "Their fire isn't just superheated plasma. It's matter and energy woven together in ways that violate half the laws of physics. But they've only ever used it for direct combat." Martinez was beginning to understand. "You want to turn their greatest strength into something completely different." "I want to turn their fire into the most effective electronic warfare system in the galaxy," Zara confirmed. "The Void Hunters rely on their ship's AI systems for everything. Navigation, targeting, life support. What happens if those systems suddenly can't tell the difference between a friendly ship and an enemy?" The implications hit Martinez like a physical blow. Chaos, complete tactical breakdown. They'd be firing on their own ships within minutes. But the dragons would have to get close enough to breathe on the ships, Dr. Yamoto pointed out. Void Hunter vessels have point defense systems that could cut down anything that approaches. Zara's grin was pure predator. Not if they can't see what's coming. The next 2 days passed in a frenzy of preparation that transformed both the human camp and the dragon city into something neither species had ever seen before. Human engineering expertise combined with dragon magic in ways that produced results bordering on miraculous. Martinez and her team worked with dragon artisans to create camouflage, systems that bent light and sensor readings around anything they covered. The dragon's natural ability to manipulate electromagnetic fields, guided by human understanding of electronics, produced stealth capabilities that made ships simply disappear from any scanning system. Meanwhile, Dr. Yamoto collaborated with the dragon scholars to develop what they euphemistically called confusion fire. Instead of the pure destructive force of normal dragon flame, this weaponized breath would carry microscopic, crystalline particles programmed to interfere with artificial intelligence systems. The dragons threw themselves into the project with enthusiasm that surprised even Zara. These ancient, proud creatures were discovering the joy of sneaky tactics and underhanded warfare. Elder Crystallis herself participated in developing what she called false flame protocols that would make dragonfire signatures appear to come from empty space. But the most ambitious project was Zara's own contribution. Using salvaged components from the Wanderer's Hope and crystalline formations provided by the dragons, she was building something that had never existed before. A gravity bomb? Martinez stared at the device taking shape in the crashed ship's cargo bay. Zara, the energy requirements alone would drain our entire power grid. Not if we don't build it ourselves, Zara replied, adjusting the crystalline matrix at the device's core. We just need to convince the Void Hunters to build it for us. She pointed to the readings on her scanner. The crystals in this world don't just store energy. They amplify it, and they resonate with anything that generates a hyperspace field. Understanding dawned in Martinez's eyes. The Void Hunter ships, when they drop out of hyperspace, the crystals will turn their own jump drives into a gravitational weapon, Zara finished. They'll create a gravity well so intense that it'll crush anything within 100,000 kilometers. Including us, Martinez pointed out grimly. Not if we're not here when it happens, Zara replied. That's where the dragons come in. On the morning of the third day, the Void Hunter fleet materialized in orbit around the planet like a dark omen. 50 ships that looked like knives carved from shadow, their hulls absorbing the light of the system's star. From her position on Paraxis's back, hidden in a cave system kilometers below the planet's surface, Zara watched the enemy ships through a crystalline viewing screen that dragons used to observe distant events. The Void Hunters were following their standard protocol, deploying sensor arrays and scanning for signs of resistance. They're looking for dragons, Paraxis observed, his thought song tinged with grim amusement. They expect us to meet them in open battle, fire against fire. Instead, they're going to get the most painful lesson in human warfare tactics ever taught, Zara replied. Around them, nearly 300 dragons waited in hidden caves and valleys across the planet's surface. Each one was equipped with human-designed stealth systems and armed with weapons that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. In orbit, the Void Hunter ships began their descent toward the planet, their sensor arrays sweeping for signs of dragon cities or treasure vaults. They found nothing. What they were about to discover was that when humans and dragons worked together, the galaxy became a much more dangerous place for anyone foolish enough to threaten either species. The first phase of the battle began exactly as Zara had predicted. The Void Hunter fleet spread across the planet's upper atmosphere, their scanners sweeping for any sign of the dragon civilization they expected to find. What they discovered instead was a world that appeared almost completely lifeless, with only the scattered debris of a human transport ship to mark any sentient presence. Commander Vexhai of the lead Void Hunter vessel studied the readings with growing confusion. His species had raided dozens of dragon worlds over the centuries, and they all followed the same pattern. The proud creatures would emerge from their mountain lairs in massive formations, breathing fire and challenging the invaders to honorable combat. This world was different. The sensor arrays detected the electromagnetic signatures that marked dragon presence, but the creatures themselves remained hidden. Worse, the readings were scattered across the entire planet, rather than concentrated in the massive city fortresses that dragons typically favored. Perhaps they have already fled, suggested his second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Kriltar whose cybernetic implants gleamed against his dark carapace. Dragons do not flee, Vexhai replied, his mandibles clicking in thought. They would die before abandoning their ancestral homes. No, they are planning something. What they were planning became clear when the first wave of landing craft descended toward the planet's surface. The ships were halfway through the atmosphere when reality seemed to twist around them, and suddenly their sensors were reporting impossible readings. According to their instruments, there were no landing craft. Instead, their scanners showed massive dragon signatures where their own ships should have been. The automated defense systems responded instantly, targeting what they perceived as attacking enemies. The result was catastrophic. Void Hunter ships opened fire on their own landing craft, their weapon systems unable to distinguish between friend and foe. The confusion fire that dragons had breathed onto the ships during their stealthed approach was working exactly as designed, turning the invaders' own technology against them. "What is happening?" Vexhai demanded as his bridge erupted in chaos. His weapon systems were targeting his own fleet, while his scanners insisted that dragons were attacking from directions where no dragons could possibly be. Deep beneath the planet's surface, Zara watched the orbital battle unfold through crystalline viewing screens while human technicians monitored electromagnetic readings. The Void Hunters were adapting faster than she had hoped, their experienced crews beginning to compensate for the sensor confusion. "Phase 2, she announced, and Paraxis's thought song carried her words to every hidden dragon across the planet. What happened next was something the galaxy had never seen before. Dragons equipped with human stealth technology began emerging from hidden positions all across the planet's surface. But instead of the massive formations the Void Hunters expected, they attacked in small groups using hit-and-run tactics. A pair of dragons would materialize out of apparently empty sky, breathe confusion fire onto a single enemy ship, then vanish again before the Void Hunters could respond. Another group would strike from beneath the cloud layer, targeting the ship's sensor arrays with precision that spoke of careful planning rather than draconic fury. The effect was psychological as much as tactical. The Void Hunters were accustomed to fighting enemies that relied on overwhelming force and direct confrontation. They had no experience with opponents that used stealth, misdirection, and guerrilla warfare. "They're adapting to our confusion protocols," Martinez reported from her position in the mobile command center the humans had established in the crashed ship's cargo bay. "Signal degradation is down to 40% effectiveness." "That's fine," Zara replied. "We expected that. Begin Phase 3. Phase 3 was the most dangerous part of the plan, because it required the dragons to work in perfect coordination with human technology while under direct enemy fire. But the bonds forged over the past 3 days held firm, and what emerged from the crystalline forests was something that would haunt Void Hunter nightmares for generations. Dragon riders. Not the ceremonial partnerships of ancient legend, but a fusion of human tactical thinking and draconic power that created something entirely new. Humans equipped with portable versions of the confusion fire technology rode dragons equipped with stealth systems, appearing and disappearing across the battlefield like ghosts made of flame and fury. Zara and Paraxis led the assault, their mental link allowing them to coordinate attacks with precision that seemed almost supernatural. They would emerge from empty space directly above a Void Hunter ship, with Zara targeting the vessel's weak points while Paraxis provided the firepower to exploit them. But the real devastation came from what the Void Hunters couldn't see. While the Dragon Riders drew their attention, human engineering teams were working frantically in the planet's deep caves, preparing the trap that would end the battle. "Crystalline resonance matrix is at 80% synchronization," Dr. Yamato reported, her hands flying over improvised control systems. "We need the enemy ships to drop out of hyperspace one more time for the gravity amplification to reach critical mass." "They're preparing to retreat," Martinez observed, monitoring the orbital battle. "Vexhai is no fool. He knows his fleet is taking unacceptable losses." Through her link with Paraxis, Zara could sense the thoughts of dragons across the planet. They were exhausted but exhilarated, having discovered that warfare could be an art form as intricate as their ancient songs. But they needed the Void Hunters to attempt one more hyperspace jump for the final trap to work. "Time for the oldest trick in human warfare," Zara announced, her voice carrying across the communications network that linked dragons and humans across the planet. "We're going to give them what they think they want." The deception was beautiful in its simplicity. Every dragon on the planet suddenly appeared in the skies above Ethermount, their stealth systems deactivated and their scales blazing with defiant fire. To the Void Hunters, it looked like the dragon civilization had finally abandoned their strange tactics and reverted to the traditional mass formation they expected. "Commander." Vexhai studied the readings with satisfaction mixed with suspicion. Nearly 300 dragons had revealed themselves, hovering in defensive formations around what appeared to be their primary city. It was exactly what Void Hunter tactics were designed to counter. "Prepare the planet crackers," he ordered. "We end this now." But as his ships began to descend for the final assault, Zara was counting down to something the Void Hunters couldn't possibly anticipate. Every dragon in the sky above Ethermount was carrying human-built transmitters, devices that would flood the enemy ships with specific electromagnetic frequencies at precisely the right moment. Crystal resonance at 95%, Dr. Yamato reported. Hyperspace field amplification is ready. All dragons prepare for emergency scatter, Zara broadcast. Execute in 3, 2, 1, now! The dragons vanished from the sky above Ethermount, just as the Void Hunter ships entered final attack formation. But their disappearance wasn't retreat. It was the signal for the trap to spring. The electromagnetic pulse that erupted from the hidden transmitters was precisely tuned to interfere with hyperspace field generators. The Void Hunter ships, preparing to unleash planet-destroying weapons, suddenly found their own hyperspace cores destabilizing. What happened next violated several laws of physics and redefined the meaning of overkill. The crystalline formations scattered across the planet began resonating with the unstable hyperspace fields, amplifying them exponentially. Instead of the controlled hyperspace jumps the Void Hunters were attempting, they found themselves caught in a gravitational cascade that turned their own ships into the focus of a localized space-time distortion. The gravity well that formed above the planet was visible from orbit as a sphere of twisted light that bent the very stars around it. Void Hunter ships, each massing several million tons, were crushed like insects in the grip of forces that exceeded anything in their experience, Commander. Vexai had just enough time to realize that he had been outmaneuvered by creatures he had dismissed as primitive before his flagship was compressed to the size of a marble. The battle was over in less than 30 seconds. 50 Void Hunter ships, along with their crews and the terror they had brought to countless worlds, were reduced to a debris field that would orbit the planet for the next 1,000 years as a warning to anyone else who might threaten the children of Earth and their dragon allies. In the aftermath, as dragons and humans worked together to clean up the orbital debris, Zara found herself standing on the observation deck of the rebuilt Wanderer's Hope, watching Paraxis and the other dragons perform victory flights through the crystalline canyons. You know, Martinez said, joining her at the viewport, when we crashed on this world, I thought we were doomed, stranded on an alien planet with no hope of rescue. And now? Zara asked. Martinez smiled, watching a formation of dragons execute maneuvers that would have been impossible without human tactical training. Now I think we might have just changed the balance of power in this entire sector of the galaxy. 6 months after the Battle of Ethermount, as the galactic news networks had taken to calling it, the planet that had once been designated only as Kepler 442c had become something unprecedented in galactic history. The first formally recognized Human-Dragon Alliance world. The changes were visible from orbit. Where once there had been only the scar of a crashed transport ship, now there was a thriving settlement that blended human engineering with dragon architecture in ways that seemed to defy both physics and good sense. Crystalline spires twisted up from the planet's surface like frozen music, while human-built platforms and walkways connected dragon areas to research laboratories and manufacturing centers. Zara stood on the observation platform of the new Wanderer, the ship that had been built from the combined wreckage of their original transport and salvaged Void Hunter technology. She was no longer the frightened teenager who had crashed on this world. The past months had changed her in ways that went beyond the physical scars from dragon riding and the mental discipline required to maintain her link with Paraxis. She had become something new, the first human-dragon translator, capable of bridging the gap between two species that thought in fundamentally different ways. Her appointment as official ambassador between the Human Colonial Authority and the Dragon Confederation had surprised no one who knew her, but had sent shockwaves through the galactic political establishment. The Council of Worlds is still refusing to recognize our sovereignty, Captain Reeves reported, joining her on the platform. He had grown comfortable with heights that would once have terrified him, a necessary adaptation when your co-pilots were creatures that thought of clouds as traffic lanes. Let them refuse, Zara replied, watching Paraxis practice aerial maneuvers with a squad of human pilots and modified fighters. They'll change their minds when the next wave of Void Hunter raids hits the outer colonies. The victory at Ethermount had been more significant than even Zara had realized at the time. The Void Hunters were a nomadic empire that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. their fleets appearing without warning to strip entire worlds of resources before vanishing into the dark between stars. The loss of an entire battle fleet had sent shockwaves through their command structure. More importantly, it had demonstrated something that the galaxy's established powers were still struggling to accept. Humans and dragons working together were more dangerous than either species alone. Speaking of which, Reeves continued, we've received another request for military assistance. The Altarian Republic is offering a considerable sum for our help with their Void Hunter problem. Zara nodded absently. Such requests had become routine as word spread of the hybrid tactics that had destroyed the Ethermount fleet. But she was more interested in the long-term implications than the immediate profits. Any word from Earth? She asked. The Colonial Authority is sending a full diplomatic mission, Reeves replied, due to arrive next week aboard the dreadnought Terra's Pride. Apparently, they want to see these impossible dragons for themselves. The approaching diplomatic mission was something Zara viewed with mixed feelings. On one hand, formal recognition from Earth would legitimize everything they had built here. On the other hand, she knew how humans tended to react to things they couldn't understand or control. Her concerns were interrupted by a familiar rumble of thought song as Paraxis landed on the platform beside them. The great dragon had grown even more magnificent over the past months, his scales now bearing intricate patterns that marked his status as a war leader among his people. Nest, sister, his voice whispered in her mind. Elder Crystallis requests your presence in the deep chamber. The speakers have arrived from the hidden worlds. Zara felt her pulse quicken. The speakers were dragons from the most ancient colonies, creatures so old they remembered when the first stars were young. If they had come to Ethermount, it meant the dragon clans were finally ready to make a decision about humanity's place in their civilization. The flight to the deep chamber took them through passages that existed in folded space, dimensions that dragons navigated instinctively but which left Zara's human brain reeling with concepts it wasn't designed to process. The chamber itself was older than human civilization, carved from crystalline formations that had grown for millions of years in the planet's core. The assembled speakers were unlike any dragons Zara had seen before. Their scales had taken on the quality of starlight itself, and their eyes held depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies. When they spoke, their thought songs carried harmonics that made reality itself vibrate. Small flame friend, the eldest speaker addressed her, its mental voice carrying the weight of eons. You have done something that we thought impossible. You have shown us that there are other ways to sing the song of existence. Elder Crystallis translated the formal dragon speech into concepts Zara's human mind could grasp. The speakers have been debating whether humans possess what dragons call fire soul, the quality that separates true people from mere clever animals. And their decision? Zara asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The eldest speaker's thought song carried what might have been amusement. Young flame friend, you pulled a thorn from a wounded dragon's nose when you could have fled to safety. You stood between our children and danger without thought for your own survival. You taught us new ways to fight and new ways to think. The ancient creature's eye fixed on her with intensity that made her feel transparent. The question was never whether humans possess fire soul. The question was whether we were wise enough to recognize it. Around the chamber, the other speakers rumbled their agreement, a sound that made the crystalline walls ring like bells. What does this mean? Zara asked. It means, Elder Crystallis replied, that the Dragon Confederation formally recognizes humanity as a sister species. It means that the hidden worlds will open their borders to human explorers and traders. It means that the ancient treaties and trade agreements that connect dragon colonies across the galaxy now extend to human space. The implications hit Zara like a physical blow. Humanity had just gained access to a galactic civilization that spanned thousands of worlds and had existed since before their son was born. Trade routes, technology exchanges, cultural partnerships that would transform both species in ways neither could imagine alone. But the eldest speaker wasn't finished. There is more, flame friend. The speakers have voted to offer humanity something that has never been given to another species, which is the right to bond, Crystallis translated. The right for humans and dragons to become true partners, sharing thoughts and dreams and the fire that burns in both your souls. Zara looked at Paraxis, feeling the mental link that had grown between them over the past months. She had thought their connection was unique, a product of the circumstances that had brought them together. But the speakers were offering to make such bonds available to any human and dragon who chose to forge them. "Think carefully, young ambassador," the eldest speaker warned. "This is not a decision to be made lightly. Dragons who bond with humans will share your brief lifespans and intense emotions. Humans who bond with dragons will carry the weight of our memories and the fire of our ancient songs. Both species will be changed by such unions." Zara didn't need to think about her answer. She had already made this choice the night she pulled a thorn from a dragon's nose. "Yes," she said simply, "for both our peoples, yes." The song that rose from the assembled speakers was unlike anything in her experience, a harmony that seemed to encompass the music of entire galaxies. And in that song she heard something that made her smile. She heard the future. 10 years had passed since the first human-dragon bond was formalized in the deep chamber of Ethermount, and the galaxy was still struggling to adapt to the implications. The dreadnought Terra's legacy hung in orbit above the planet that was now officially known as New Harmony, its massive bulk dwarfed by the dragon cities that floated freely in the space around it, their crystalline structures gleaming, like jewels against the starfield. Ambassador. Zara Chen Starwing stood on the observation deck of the orbital station that served as the diplomatic hub for 36 different species, watching the daily miracle of interspecies cooperation that had become routine over the past decade. Human ships flew in formation with dragons whose wingspans exceeded the length of most vessels, while hybrid technologies that shouldn't have been possible created wonders that redefined what either species thought they could achieve. The scars from her years of dragon riding were mostly hidden now beneath the formal robes of her office, but the mental link she shared with Paraxis had only grown stronger with time. Through their bond, she could feel his presence in the deep reaches, working with human scientists and dragon artisans to develop the next generation of impossible technologies. The Altarian delegation is requesting another meeting about military cooperation. Her aide, a young human named Marcus who was partnered with a dragon barely larger than a house cat, informed her. Apparently the Void Hunter raids are intensifying along their border. Zara nodded absently. The past decade had seen the emergence of humanity as a major galactic power, but not in the way anyone had expected. Instead of building massive fleets or conquering territory, humans had become the galaxy's most sought-after military advisors, teaching other species the art of asymmetric warfare that had proven so devastating against conventional forces. "Schedule them for next week," she replied, "but make sure they understand our terms. No offensive operations, no civilian targets. And any technology we share remains strictly defensive." The principles that governed human-dragon military cooperation had been established after the third Void Hunter fleet was destroyed, using hybrid tactics. Both species had agreed that their combined capabilities were too dangerous to be used casually, and too valuable to be withheld from species facing extinction. Her contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Sarah Martinez, now Admiral Martinez and commander of the Joint Human-Dragon Defense Fleet. The years had been kind to her, though the weight of command showed in the silver threading through her hair and the careful way she moved. "We've received a priority message from the Deep Survey Fleet," Martinez announced, her expression grave. "The Starseeker has found something you need to see." The briefing room aboard the Terra's Legacy was filled with representatives from a dozen different species, but all attention was focused on the holographic display at the room's center. The image showed a region of space that appeared to be completely empty, but the sensor readings told a different story. "It's artificial," Dr. Yamato explained, her hair now completely white but her mind as sharp as ever. "A structure roughly the size of Earth's solar system, but completely invisible to normal sensors. We only found it because our dragon-enhanced detection arrays picked up gravitational anomalies." Admiral Chen of the Colonial Defense Force, a stern woman who had never quite adjusted to working with dragons, studied the readings with obvious unease. "How long has it been there?" "Based on the gravitational effects on nearby star systems, at least 10,000 years, Yamato replied. "Possibly much longer." Zara felt Paraxis's presence touch her mind across the vast distance that separated them, his thought song carrying images and concepts that her human brain could barely process. What she saw made her blood run cold. "It's a shipyard," she announced, causing every head in the room to turn toward her. "The Void Hunters didn't just lose a fleet at Ethermount. They lost their main battle group. What we're looking at is where they build their replacements. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. The Void Hunter raids that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries weren't random attacks by nomadic fleets. They were the product of an industrial complex that dwarfed anything the known species had ever built. "How many ships?" Admiral Chen asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Through her link with Paraxis, Zara could sense the dragon artisans working frantically to analyze the sensor data. Their ability to perceive reality in ways humans couldn't was revealing details that conventional analysis would have missed. "Thousands," she replied grimly, "possibly tens of thousands. And they're not just building ships. They're building something else. Something bigger." The holographic display shifted, zooming in on the structure's center where sensor readings indicated a massive construction project unlike anything in the galactic databases. Whatever the Void Hunters were building, it was larger than most space stations and surrounded by energy fields that bent space-time around it. "We need more information," Admiral Chen declared. "I'm ordering a full reconnaissance mission." "No," Zara said firmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 10 years learning to think like both human and dragon. A conventional reconnaissance mission would be detected and destroyed before it got within a light year of that facility. But there might be another way. Over the next hour, she outlined a plan that was audacious even by the standards of human-dragon cooperation. Instead of sending ships or probes, they would send dragons equipped with the most advanced stealth technology ever developed. Creatures capable of existing in the vacuum of space and navigating by instincts that had evolved over millions of years. "The risks are enormous," Martinez pointed out. "We're talking about sending living beings into a facility that could incinerate them without warning. The risks of not knowing what the Void Hunters are planning are even greater," Zara replied. "If they're building some kind of superweapon, every species in the galaxy needs to know about it." The debate continued for hours, but in the end, the decision was unanimous. The reconnaissance mission would proceed, using capabilities that existed nowhere else in the galaxy and tactics that had been developed through the unique partnership between two species that had learned to trust each other completely. As the meeting dispersed and representatives returned to their respective fleets and governments, Zara remained behind to coordinate with Paraxis and the other dragon volunteers who would undertake the mission. Through their mental link, she could feel his determination mixed with an emotion that dragons rarely acknowledged. Fear. Not fear of death or pain, but fear of what they might discover in the hidden depths of Void Hunter space. Both species had learned that there were things in the galaxy far older and more dangerous than either had imagined. And the structure they had found represented a threat that could change everything. But they would face it together, as they had faced every challenge over the past decade. Human ingenuity and dragon wisdom, combined in ways that made both species stronger than they had ever been alone. The reconnaissance mission would launch in 3 days, and Zara would be there to see them off, maintaining the mental link that would guide her dragon family through the darkness toward whatever truth awaited them in the void. Whatever the Void Hunters were planning, humanity and dragonkind would meet it united, with fire and fury, and the unbreakable bond that had been forged the night a human girl pulled a thorn from a dragon's nose.